I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts, you have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Mike Wilkerson, aka Stellium7. Check out my films Doors of Perception on Amazon Prime, Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku, Apple, and a few more. If you'd like to help with our film fundraiser for number 3, we have links right in the description. Anything is greatly appreciated. We are booking guests for February. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Mike Wilkerson. He has always been driven by unconventional questions. He was a hacker in the 1980s. In 1985, his exploits culminated in a brief incarceration for infiltrating computer servers at Microsoft and 3 other Seattle corporations, making him the first hacker in the world to serve jail time for computer intrusion. He recounts these groundbreaking years in his memoir, The Hacker Prince, A True Story. In recent years, he has devoted himself to independent research into non-standard cosmologies, hidden histories, gigantism, catastrophism, rapid petrification, and what he has come to call Bio-Geology. His lectures and findings can be explored on his Stellium7 YouTube channel. Mike, welcome. How you doing?
Doing good. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks so much for coming on.
How about yourself?
I'm doing great. When I first discovered your work, I have to admit I was a bit skeptical about the possibility that some of the mountains and what we're told are natural geological formations may actually be remnants of giant animals, trees, and other living beings and creatures. But after watching some of your videos, I'm much more open to these possibilities. You present very compelling evidence and observations, which I'm very much looking forward to sharing today. The rabbit hole goes very deep with this, but before we get into it, this is your first time on, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and let them know how they can find out more.
Sure. Well, I currently live in Spain. I'm on the Costa Blanca and I work as a chiropractor. I've been here for 15 years. Before that, I was in Sweden and Italy, and then I grew up in California. But I've been in Europe since '97 when I went abroad as an exchange student. And so I've had kind of a lot of different chapters in my life. And, what you've invited me on for is the most recent of those, which is the research that I've been doing over the last 10 years roughly and presenting on my YouTube channel for the last 7 years, which is called Stellium7, Stellium. Oh, it's right there on the screen. Yeah, and I have an unusual backstory because in my teens I was a hacker, and I got busted eventually for hacking in 1985. And so I came out with a book in September called The Hacker Prince, A True Story, which is chronicling my misadventures as a hacker and the time leading up to my bust and the things that happened after it. And I was living in Seattle at the time I was caught, and I was a whole court case ensued, and I was found guilty for having infiltrated Microsoft and Boeing and some other companies. And so I have the unusual distinction of having been the first hacker in the world to go to jail for the crime of hacking. Not the first hacker to be jailed, but the first to go to jail for hacking as a crime, because it was new on the legislative books, and so I was basically the poster child for the new law.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is a very entertaining story that's suitable for teens to, any people my age who are nostalgic for the old days of early computers. But yeah, so that's a fun read. That's on Amazon, and The Hacker Prince, a true story.
Right on. Talk a little bit about what brought you to this particular area of research.
Well, I've always been kind of down the rabbit holes ever since I was in my early 20s. I was given a couple of books that opened my eyes to all sorts of different subjects. Um, but I also have had a lot of formal education, bachelor's degree, and then another degree in master's in chiropractic. So I've studied a lot in the public indoctrination system, you could say. Um, and so there are a whole lot of different subjects that I never really pondered that I came across about a decade ago. That people were, starting to question every aspect of our reality, and, trying to determine what is real and what isn't when it comes to the narratives that we've been given. And so it started with a friend of mine, Alex Michael. He's also known as Conspiracy Music Guru. He does a lot of amazing music, just touching on all sorts of things that are related to conspiracy. And he started challenging me on some different subjects that related to the Earth itself. And I was a big space junkie and a a techie, and I loved. All the Star Wars and Star Trek kind of stuff when I was younger, and I thought he was absolutely absurd for questioning just the nature of our realm itself and whether it might not be what we were taught. And so that was an initial foray into a whole bunch of subjects that I had never even thought had merit. And the more I dug into things trying to debunk him, the more difficult it got, because I'm pretty methodical and I have a background in the scientific method. And so I started to see that there were a lot of holes in things that I had just taken for granted along the way as fact. And the more I dug into those supposed facts, looking for the evidence, it was wanting everywhere I turned. Um, so after a year or two of digging deep into that, other subjects came up that are now pretty widespread in social media, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, touching on the idea that much of our history is a fabrication as well. I studied history in college. I was well aware of the progression between the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Roman Empire and all these things. And along the way comes the subject of Tartary, which I thought was absurd initially. And this is a supposed empire that was larger than the Holy Roman Empire that we've never been told about, and that's not in our history books. Well, it is in our history books, but not the ones that they're giving us in school. And in fact, the further back in time you go, the more references there are to all of this information is just spoken of as fact. And there are ancient maps, and you can find, all kinds of depictions of everything down to the clothes that the people wore in different parts of this empire. Um, so, pyramids on every continent in ways that they shouldn't be based on what we've been taught. Star forts, mud floods, world's fairs, orphan trains, asylums. I mean, it's one rabbit hole after another, and each one seems kind of anomalous and weird. And yeah, it doesn't make sense when you start to dig into it. But what you don't realize when you start, to delve into these subjects is that they all dovetail very nicely with a worldview that's completely different from what we were taught. And so that kind of opened the door to looking at geology with new eyes as well, and archaeology. And I was big into Graham Hancock's work and reading his books and watching his interviews. And I thought it was fascinating that our Earth's history might be very different than what we were taught. So then comes subjects of rapid petrification, something that I'd never been taught or was even a possibility, other than the myths and the legends like Medusa and the different stories that we get of things turning to stone rapidly in the legends and in the ancient religious texts as well. And yeah, this, I knew about petrified trees, but they give us timelines of, this is something that happened 200 million years ago and takes a very, very, very long time to occur. And so as I started to dive into those subjects, I found so much evidence of anomalous finds in the geological record that don't match what we're taught about petrogenesis, which is the origin of stone and how it comes about. They give us this very simplistic cycle of petrogenesis, which is just plant and animal life dying and becoming the forest floor, creating these sedimentary layers, and then those layers compress over time, and that pressure creates what we call metamorphic rock, which is a far firmer kind of stone. It's about a 7 on the hardness scale, diamond being a 10. And that's the kind of stone that almost looks biological, right? Because it's got all these swirls in it, and and then the third stage of that is the pressure is so great that that stone melts into magma, and then that gets pushed up through fissures in the Earth's mantle, and we call those volcanoes. And we can witness volcanoes doing their thing. We can see the aftermath, and so that's not something that's being disputed. What volcanoes actually are, that's potentially up for dispute. I have my own wacky theories when it comes to them. And then add in this idea of gigantism, which is actually in mainstream geological narrative as well, because we have these 5 great cataclysms that have occurred, where the most recent being the dinosaurs getting wiped out 65 million years ago from a asteroid strike, and others with the trilobites, for example. These different time periods when there were great cataclysms that wiped out much of the life on Earth. And so they also talk about gigantism. They talk about how things were much, much bigger. Maybe the oxygen concentration levels were higher. And, insects that something this big in our current era might have been as much as a meter wide back in the day. So that's mainstream saying that. But then we also have our myths and legends that are talking about things like gigantic creatures that were the size of mountains. And that was something that I never gave any credence. I just thought it was something that was myth, fairy tale, legend, fun stories from primitive peoples that wanted to, project their ideas of how things worked onto everything around them, rather than actually having a deeper understanding of how things work and where things come from and how long it takes and that sort of thing. So that was like a nexus of different ideas that came in a pretty short amount of time. And so how it all began for me, my investigations, was I saw some videos touching on all these ideas, and the town that I live in Spain has a mountain called Montgo, Montgo, which is also affectionately known as the elephant, because it looks very much like an elephant, and from more than one angle as well. And I always liked the mountain and had climbed on it for many years before I began these investigations. And I thought, wow, sure looks like an elephant, but I never for a moment considered the possibility, well, maybe it was once an elephant. And so I thought this would be a fun, intellectual exercise, just a flight of fancy, to just see what would happen if I actually looked into this in a really methodical way, to see if there was anything to it. And about an hour on Google Earth, I already had 10 anatomical features on the macro level. And 10 is a big number. Like most people, as soon as they hear stories about this kind of thing, they immediately, if they know the word, they default to pareidolia. They say that, sure, it looks like something, but it's not that thing that you think it looks like. That's a trick of the mind, just like we see faces in clouds. So that's known as pareidolia. So I was already well aware of that before I began. And so also being a chiropractor, I'm well versed in anatomy and histology, which is the study of tissues. So when I started to look at this on Google Earth, I found that there were way already, way beyond what I would have guessed I would have found just looking at it from above and tilting and looking at different angles. There was an eye socket right where the eye should be. It was shaped like an eye socket, not just an opening in the mountain. Behind that, where an ear would be, there was a quarter moon change of color in the mountain that looked almost like an ear had been removed. Where the head meets the shoulders, there were curves in on both sides, just like the head would curve in where the neck is and then go to the shoulder. I could see a spine and rib cage. There was a big deep canyon right between where the legs would be. So now we're getting like beyond pareidolia into the weird. What is this place? Is it a simulation? Are we in just some kind of a computer game? Is this a real possibility? So these are all the things that are going through my mind. And so I'd been to the cave many times, just hiking, just for pleasure. And I had always marveled over how weird it was there. I couldn't figure out how does this form, because it's at 375 meters altitude, and it's very unusual to see. And so I decided, thinking about the eye socket and the anatomy of the skull. All skulls are shaped different from species to species, but the basic makeup is the same. And the eye socket in the human eye is comprised of 7 different bones, and they all have meeting points that are known as sutures. And then there's openings, which are called fissures, that, where the optic nerve goes and blood vessels and whatnot. And so I had a laundry list of anatomical features that I would expect to find going back up to the eye of Montgo with new eyes, if there was any truth to the harebrained idea. And I documented that whole process, and took photographs and filmed while I was up there. And 7 years ago, I started a series called Unveiling a Titan. And the first video is just kind of an overview, like what I just gave you, presenting the idea, talking about history, talking about just the idea that all of our history may be fabrication and things were actually very different from what we were taught. And then looking at the mountain. And then the second video is about the eye. The third video is about the ear, because there were all kinds of crazy things that happened along the way that I never would have dreamed of. Fourth is about the tissues of the mountain. So here I'm putting on my chiropractic cap and really looking at the breakdown of bone and the structure of bone and what's inside of bone and the blood and the composition of blood and what am I finding in the mountain. And what I found continually anytime I went looking for something was it was a one-to-one match, to the point where after 2 years of research, I had comprised a list of over 50 anatomical and histological correlations. So that's a massive number. Anyone who knows games of chance and odds, and it's one thing to look at something and go, oh, it looks like an elephant. It's another thing to start to get on it and in it and all around it and looking at it from above and finding feature after feature after feature. And I'm not just saying this. This is not me trying to convince people with words. I've got loads of videos and presentations on my channel, live streams where I've gone in depth into this stuff. Some of them are 3 and 4 hours long because there's so much material to cover. Yeah, so that's really how all the research began. And then along the way, I came across another channel called Hangman1128, and he was essentially doing the same thing I was doing with the mountain, but he was doing it looking at the evidence for the great trees. So think like avatar-sized trees, but like even bigger. We're talking trees that were miles wide at the base. And that sounds completely absurd, and it's completely impossible based on our mainstream model of gravity and what they say causes things to go down, that these structures and creatures would have collapsed under their own weight because their mass would be so great. So that gets into a whole other set of rabbit holes. Is gravity what we're taught? And is there actually evidence for Einsteinian gravity, which replaced Newtonian gravity? Most people don't know the difference, and they waffle back and forth between the two whenever they're trying to justify their claims. So the big trees, Moltko and the research I've done there, rapid petrification and the evidence for that, and the different anomalous geological features that are found all over the world that I've documented and presented thoroughly, that completely disrupt the mainstream story about how we're told stone is formed.
Right.
And disrupt it in a way that matches beautifully and perfectly with biology, anatomy, in ways that we don't notice because we're blinded. I call it paradigm blindness. We're blinded to the possibility because we've been taught a whole set of things about how things form and how long it takes and what happened. So we don't see, like, oh, that thing over there that looks biological, maybe it once was, right? But not in the way they tell us, over hundreds of millions of years of compression becoming something entirely different, but actually something that not so long ago might have been a fleshy creature or a large plant structure that is now stone, and you can still see it in every way because it's right there for you to see if you just look at it, but we're blinded to that possibility.
Right. You gave us a couple of examples. Montgo, I believe Devil's Tower is a great example of this. What other examples can you give us so that the folks can get an idea of what we're talking about with these ancient petrified creatures?
Well, Devil's Tower is a great example of something that looks a lot like a tree, and a lot of people would bet their life on that. Not people coming from the mainstream at all, or geologists, of course, but people who are more open-minded and or maybe gullible, you could say. I lean towards tree. There are other possibilities. There's certain kinds of fungus that grow in an identical fashion. So if trees were miles wide at the base, then that could be what's known as stemonitis. It's a type of mushroom that grows that, from a scale perspective, Devil's Tower, not many miles wide, but smaller, could be, something on a much, much larger structure. But when you look, like I toured with Hangman 1128 in the Black Hills of South Dakota. I went to the Garden of the Gods in Colorado. And these are sites that when you pull back the veil that's been put in front of our eyes and just look at them with logic and common sense, you realize that the mainstream narratives make no sense, because what you find is that little tiny pieces of wood that you might pick up from a decaying tree in a forest that are like this big are mirrored in a fractal level up by the structures of the Black Hills and Garden of the Gods, for example, where this little piece would be something that is 50 to 100 feet wide, but it's exhibiting all of the exact same features to perfection, just on a much, much larger scale. But it's also microscopic, so as you go down in scale while looking at the larger structures, it's still showing all the micro layering. And then the sap, for example, of the trees petrifies to quartz. Geologists will say, no, that's not what happens. But when you look at it for what it is, you realize that you've got the tree structure and it's all of its beautiful manifestations. And then in that, you have the sap, which is petrified, and you can see the sap, the quartz seams, which is where we go looking for things like gold and silver and precious metals. They're mining the quartz seams in order to extract the precious metals. So I coined the term biogeology as a placeholder term to distinguish between the mainstream narratives and the kinds of things that I've been investigating for the last many years. And if there's any truth to any of the things that I'm presenting, then we needed a placeholder term to distinguish between the two, and biogeology is perfect um, because it's denoting that more direct connection between biological life and geology. As far as data points on the trees, there are many, many, many. So there are all of these plateau mountains around the world that there's lots of videos on Instagram and TikTok now of people sharing these, saying they're definitely tree and they could very well be. They have these perpetual waterfalls that are coming out of nowhere. That water is being pushed up through channels into these plateau mountains. Sometimes they just jut upward out of nothing, and then cascading eternally. So it's very interesting because those are called artesian wells, artery,
Yeah.
articulation. They're using anatomical terms there. There are lots of examples of trees that have gushing, like waterfalls coming out of their knots, actual living trees that have tapped into the, you know, waters below, and it's just coming up through channels in the trees. And then these guys, you can find their YouTube channel. It's called the Action Adventure Twins on YouTube. And they're going and they're spelunking these incredible cave structures that I never knew existed until about 5 years ago. It's absolutely mind-blowing, the stuff they're doing. And when you look at what they're going down and the channels they're going down into, it looks identical to channels in a tree. So I think the reason, it's all around us, we're blinded to it, but the remains of it all are still there. But we're just told these stories that cause us to not see it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned rapid petrification. Let's talk a little bit about what could possibly cause this. There are many theories about cyclical cataclysms that may have wiped out much of the life on the face of this planet. Some of the theories include a lot of the life could have been almost instantaneously changed on a molecular scale by some kind of event. Is that what you're speculating could have caused these giants to be petrified?
Yeah, you're talking about a transmutation of elements where the structures in the plant or animal have actually converted into another thing and become
Hmm.
stone. That's not acknowledged in the mainstream. They say that elements can only form in the heart of stars, supernovas, nuclear fission, that kind of thing. But biological transmutation is also a thing that they don't acknowledge, and that's a very easy one to prove. Simple things like a chicken egg, where the chicken is producing an egg every day, and that egg's shell has more calcium than the chicken is consuming in its diet.
Yeah.
Right. So the chicken has to be creating calcium by taking the other things that are in its diet and it's fusing them together in some way to create the calcium, which is the primary ingredient in the eggshell. So right off the bat, biology is proving transmutation of elements, but they don't talk about that. There's another experiment that was done with trees, or they took a tree that was in a pot. They weighed the pot, the soil, and the tree before they started. They put it in a room that was sealed off, and all it had access to was sunlight and distilled water. So there were no minerals or anything in the water. Nothing, no food was given. And over the course of, I think it was like 7 years, this thing grew and took on a whole lot of mass. So where's that coming from? If it's just distilled water and sunlight, there shouldn't be any building blocks for the tree to grow and become bigger. So clearly the tree is creating what it needs from those things. But when it comes to rapid petrification, well, I'll just tell the mainstream narrative first when it comes to petrification, which is what's known as permineralization. And what that is the slow infusion of the elements outside of a structure, whether it's plant or animal, into the structure. So say a tree falls down and it's buried in either mud or something like volcanic ash from a lahar. This happened when Mount St. Helens blew. It created these massive slurry flows, which created like 30 feet of sedimentary layering. Sedimentary wasn't sedimentary, but it looked like sedimentary because it had all the micro thin layering that you would normally attribute to sedimentary layers, but it happened in a matter of hours. And then all kinds of trees were downed, and that combined with the water and the volcanic ash was already enough to cause those trees to petrify, some of them. So that's right out the gate. Like, wait a minute, 200 million years versus some year, a few years. I mean, that's a blink of an eye in geological time, right? Shouldn't be
Mm.
possible. So there's what I didn't understand is not only are there lots of anomalous things in the geological record that shouldn't exist when it comes to petrification and fossilization, which I go into those and I present those on my channel as well. But we're given this simplistic story of things infusing their way in, but I've come to the conclusion that there's a whole variety of ways that things can petrify. They can petrify through high mineral content waters. There's a lake called Lake Natron in Tanzania where creatures fall in and they petrify. They die because the waters are so caustic. They're very, it's like a pH 12 or something like that. There's another place in England called Mother Shipton's Cave where high mineral content waters come down from the cave, and that people go and they hang ropes there and they tie objects to the ropes, and those ropes get encased and eventually hardened to stone.
Mm.
So that's high mineral content waters. Heat can also do incredible things to, it can vitrify, it can cause things to turn to glass, it can turn them to char, to coal and different things, like in the case of tree. Um, and then there's plasma as well. Like there's a lot of people that talk about the plasma apocalypse, that there was some event that scarred the Earth. There's a channel called Thunderbolts Project where they're looking at an electric model of the universe, and they're talking about Lichtenberg figures, which are these fractal-like patterns that look like like the branches of a tree or our lungs that are all over the Earth, and the biggest of them being the Grand Canyon. And those Lichtenberg figures, we're told, are formed through little tiny rivulets of creeks that then converge into bigger and bigger, till they're rivers. And then eventually, over hundreds of millions of years, they carve out the Grand Canyon. But suspiciously, when you look at the Grand Canyon, you don't see signs of erosion on the canyon walls, right? It's not like it's smoothed out, which is what you would expect from that constant water flow.
Mm.
So some people have hypothesized that those structures are being created by massive, massive plasma events. And that is an interesting theory that's also got a counterpart on a smaller scale where there are experiments, like there's a channel I reference a lot on my channel, and I've forgotten the name of it now, but this guy goes with using a microwave. He takes chromium oxide and aluminum oxide, just powders, mixes them together in a votive, puts, I think, a little steel wool in for conductivity, and puts a ceramic lid on top, puts that into a microwave, turns it on for 10 seconds, and the magnetron of the microwave is creating this plasma arcing, and he literally is creating raw ruby in 10 seconds in a standard home
Wow.
microwave, right? So that's very interesting because ruby is a 9 on the hardness scale after diamond. We're told diamond forms over a million years with millions of pounds of pressure, compressing coal, which is carbon, down into this incredibly tight matrix, which is diamond. Yet they can make, you know, what do you say? Not pseudo diamonds, but synthetic diamonds, you know. And this guy's creating rubies, which are 9 on a hardness scale, in seconds from powders. So I think that there's a whole lot of evidence out there that what we've been taught about how things form, how long it takes, the rules governing that might all be wrong.
Yeah.
And that's, I think I've come to the conclusion that most of the ologies are
Yeah.
compromised, if not all of them, and it wouldn't be an ology if it wasn't. And so there's gatekeeping everywhere you turn. And, most people are doing it good-heartedly because they've grown up with a set of beliefs, and then they become experts in their field,
Yeah.
have expertitis, and so they're just they're not able to see what's right in front of their eyes.
100%. Well, let's get deeper into the possibilities of what we really may be looking at with some of these geological formations. You've done videos about the possibilities of limestone being bone, petrified hearts, as you mentioned earlier, eyeballs and arteries. Let's talk a little bit more about the discoveries you've made and the possibilities that these may be biological innards of beings, basically.
Yeah, well, like I said, I had the opportunity to tour some of those sites with the remains of the trees myself, and like when it comes to an order of confidence level, I'm 100% convinced that that is real and that those are the remains of trees. Number two for me would be my own research when it comes to a discovery that I made that some of the stones that we see might actually be petrified organs. And I've documented this extensively. I have hundreds and hundreds of examples of this reoccurring pattern that I recognized in stones that because of my chiropractic background, it started with one stone that I found at a river bottom. I picked it up and I'm like, wait a minute, this looks like a heart. And the more I examined it, the more I realized it had the openings where the two biggest blood vessels, the aorta and vena cava, should be. The shape of it was correct. It had a white outer layering, and everywhere that had worn away, it was red underneath. Our hearts are in a white sac called the pericardium, which is fascia. And already in the river bottom, I recognized probably 10 different anatomical features in this stone. And again, games of chance, like we're told that these are broken pieces of larger structure that have banged around and eroded in the river due to water action, acid rain, abrasion, these kinds of things. And that they take on this smooth cobblestone shape because of that action. Well, that may also be true, but that doesn't explain this find or the many that came after, because after getting it back to my home and getting out the anatomy books and really examining the heart, because I went deep into it in college, but I brushed up on it. I started documenting that one stone has 23 anatomical features. I went in with endoscopic cameras to look inside the chambers, found more features. I had them CAT scanned. I've looked at them with microscopy, and so 23 is a massive number. And some of them are highly, highly specific. So like there's a hole where the coronary artery, which is the one that usually gives people a heart attack, that comes out of the heart and it goes across above these two folds in the heart. And there's an indentation there where the artery sits. The hole is there, the indentation is there. The fat below the line, which is very common in many hearts, is there. I mean, these are highly specific. So I started making videos on that subject, and then I figured, well, if there's any truth to this, then I should be able to find more. So I went out and I documented my next trip out, and I found another 10, 12. They weren't as specific as that, but what started to happen is I started to recognize that there was a reoccurring pattern in stone that couldn't explain that couldn't be explained by the abrasion scenario, because these are highly specific. Like this one here is a good example. The heart, when it contracts, it tapers in on the sides, and then at the top is where the two biggest blood vessels are, right where those indentations are, right? The back side of the heart will either be flat or will curve in, because as the heart is contracting, it tapers in like this, and from the bottom it twists like this. And so a lot of these stones that I was finding have the twist, they have this tapering in on the sides, they have the indentations at the top, and some of them, like this one, if you put it underwater, it turns red. It's pink right now. I don't know if the camera's picking that up. Yeah, and then so I could just spend a couple hours just showing you these all day, but this is so there's a faceting on the front of the heart, and then the back is either flat or curved in. One of the two ventricles is a thin wall and the other is a thick wall. So when the contraction happens, the thin wall would give you a knife edge, which is what you see here, and then the other side would be thicker. So the longer that list of specific features I give you, the more difficult it should be to find a rock like that, right? To the point where the list gets so long it should be impossible. I want a rock that looks like this and it has this feature and that feature and that feature. There's no way you're going to start to find those in droves, repeating over and over again in a scalable fashion with such high degrees of specificity. And that's exactly what I've been documenting. So this is such a reoccurring thing. You can see the scale. There's an indentation at the top again, the knife edge, the flattened back, right? There's where your aorta would have been.
That's so interesting.
Twist at the bottom, right? And we could just do this for the next 2 hours where I could just go through these and show you that this is not me being very clever and going and picking out stones that match my harebrained theory, right? There's the indentation again at the top. This is something that is not explained in the mainstream geological narrative. And in fact, I was at a party 2 weeks ago, and there was a woman there who was a PhD in geology with a specialization in studying radioactive isotopes in order to determine where things are from on Earth and when they were formed. And we spoke for about an hour, and I started to show her the evidence of these things. And initially, she wasn't taken aback. She was open-minded, but she was not having it because she knows how this stuff forms. This is limestone, and it formed in this fashion. I was completing her sentences for her because I know the mainstream narratives on these things, and I also know how they don't match up. And so by the end of that conversation, she actually was like, this is actually a very interesting theory.
Wow.
So I made a great connection there because she actually has access to a laboratory with instrumentation that might help me take this to the next level, which is to try and determine what are what's the molecular composition of these stones? Because obviously they're not hearts now.
Yeah.
So it's not going to have the same composition as a heart. There has to have been some transmutation of elements that's occurred. So how do you determine what something once was when it's no longer that? It's a challenging thing. But
Do you have any theories
so
on what kind of animal or maybe human that those hearts came from?
I think it was everything, because I've got them down to millimeters. Like this, big. The biggest one over here is. I'll just grab it. This is wild. It's 1.5 feet.
Oh,
Hold
wow.
on.
I want to remind everyone that is listening on the audio end, if you'd like to see the visuals that we're presenting, come on over to YouTube or Rumble.
Can't hear you if you're talking. Hold on.
I was just letting the
back on.
audience know if they want to see the visuals you're presenting to come on over to YouTube or Rumble if they're listening on the audio side.
Yeah. So this one was.
Wow.
All right. So there's the faceting. You see how it tapers in on both sides. This right here is known as the isthmus, which is the separation between the two parts of the pulmonary artery opening.
Wow.
So based on what I told you, the top should be flat, and the back side towards the top is where the aorta and the vena cava should be.
Yeah.
Right there. Right.
Amazing.
The back side is slightly curved in, and there should be a discernible twist from the bottom. So it's definitely scalable. This one also shows another feature which I didn't talk about, which is here. There's a line. And that line, I didn't know about it until I'd already been investigating this for a long time. But the heart is not what we were taught either. This was proven in 1972 by a Spanish cardiologist named Francisco Torrent Guasp. who discovered something known as the myocardioventricular band. So he was a cardiologist who didn't believe in the mainstream narrative that the heart was pumping and pushing blood to all of our cells. He's like, that's impossible. The blood vessels are getting narrower and narrower, and with one little pump, it's going all the way out to the ends of our body, stopping, which makes no sense, and then turning around and passively returning to the heart without any pumping mechanism to get it back. And it's doing this throughout our entire life. So, a plumber would tell you that's impossible.
Yeah.
Right? So he had these ideas that the circulatory system, which had been taught essentially the same for, I think, about 200 or 300 years, was not accurate. And he kept dissecting animal heart after animal heart. In his spare time, he worked out of family practice in his home as a cardiologist. And eventually he discovered that the heart is a rope. And so what he did is he boiled the heart and he removed the outer fatty layer, which is the pericardium. And once that was done, he was able to bluntly dissect it, just prying the fibers apart with his fingers, and it started to open up, and it opens up into one long band. And so under embryonic development, when we're born and our body is starting to develop, the heart is one of the very first things that comes. And so then it has this folding, and this is like if you're seeing on the screen, the fibers of the heart go in one direction and then they go in another. Well, that meeting point there is known as a suture line. Just like I was talking about the sutures in the eye socket, that suture line is where he's able to pry apart. And when he does, it opens up into one long band. So this is not something that needs to be proven because it is proof in and of itself, as I would say is true also of the great trees. Because when you're there and you're not blinded by a false paradigm, it's very easy to see what you're looking at because the small trees are still there as well, right around you, decomposing, and you can look and see that everything that those trees are doing, this big structure is also doing. And so when he made this discovery with the heart, when you see him in videos dissecting it and unrolling it, it is the proof. It's already he's already proven it by doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in watching this video about his life, because I didn't know about this until I had already been making videos on these stones, somebody mentioned it in the comment section. At the end of that video, he rolls it back up, and when he does it, I could see those lines. And I realized that a lot of these stones, this one in particular here, you can see it very clearly here, they have those lines.
Yeah.
And they're in the right place. So that's another highly specific one. So a propeller twist at the bottom because the heart is contracting like this, that's very specific. The knife edge, which I showed you in this other one here, that is very specific. The indentations at the top, which are never, ever, ever at the bottom, very specific. So, anyway, so then there's also been a lot of synchronicity that's happened as I've been doing this, because a lot of these things have just kind of fallen in my lap. I haven't gone looking for them. Like, for example, this cardiologist, I discovered the twist and the sulcus lines from watching this video about his life. He was dead. He died like 17, 18 years ago. But what's interesting is he lived and worked in private practice his whole career on the foothills of Mont Go.
Oh, wow.
Which is the mountain that I had been investigating. So it's just a wild thing. And then another synchronicity is that the river that goes alongside the mountain is called Gata de Gorgos. And the Gorgons are these Greek sisters, 3 of them, one of whom was Medusa. So the river is named after the goddess of petrification, you could say, right? So there's a lot of weirdness that's happened over these years, and I've shared it all on the channel and documented it along the way. But really, to do these topics justice, it takes about 3 or 4 hours with visuals. So I highly recommend people go and check out the info and decide for themselves. I'm not trying to, convince anybody. They can decide for themselves if the ideas have merit. But
Yeah.
the interesting thing about all of them is they're heavily, heavily rooted in empirical finds that have a specificity and quantity of features that just doesn't make sense from a random chance banging around perspective, which is what they're giving
Yeah.
us.
Well, talk a little bit about the possibility of limestone being bone.
Okay, so the fourth video that I did on unveiling a Titan was me looking at the mountain. Uh, Limestone is what it's made of, right? So the interesting thing is that limestone is said to be formed over hundreds of millions of years from compressed coral, shellfish, mollusk, and endo and exoskeleton. That's the official narrative. So what they're telling us in mainstream geology is that limestone is bone that has been compressed for hundreds of millions of years and then pushed upward through tectonic activity and movement to the plates and all of that stuff, right? So right off the bat, according to mainstream geology, you could say that limestone is bone.
Right.
Right? Now, if you look at our bones, take an arm, for example, you have two different kinds of bone. You have cortical bone, or compact bone is another name for it, which is you have osteons that grow the bone like trees, like rings of a tree, but it's thick and it has very little in the way of holes for blood vessels, because if it had too many holes, it would be fragile and it would break easily. So the cortical bone is solid and long and grows like tree, right? Inside of that is another kind of bone called trabecular bone. And trabecular is like tree. Like if you think of lungs or branching trees, it's got that fractal quality to it where it looks like Swiss cheese. But like you'll have a hole, and then in that hole, there are smaller holes that are bifurcating and going in other directions. And then those have smaller holes. So Montgo is made of two kinds of stone. You have these long, thick layers of limestone that have very little in the way of channels going into them. And then you have all kinds of stone all over the mountain that looks like Swiss cheese. And you've got the holes that are bifurcating. But not only that, in those holes, you often have red earth and iron ore. So what would that be? Well, if you think of the components of blood and also quartz, the components of blood, you have the red blood cells with hemoglobin, which is iron. That's 45% of the blood. If you centrifuge blood and you separate the red from the yellow, which would be your blood plasma, plasma is made of long chain fatty acids. So you're talking about fat. And I hypothesized early on that when things that are fat petrify, that they petrify to quartz. So you have the sap petrifying to quartz, but you also have the fat petrifying to quartz. So you've got these components all over this mountain of red earth, iron ore, and quartz crystal. And the iron is found in the channels, and some of the channels are actually lined with quartz crystal. So if you think of blood vessels petrifying, that would make sense that you would have this lining of quartz. So yeah, and then I presented this information, and I had a geologist come on my channel, and he was mocking me, and he was like, "You're an idiot. If you had just gone and looked at this limestone with the naked eye, you would have been able to see that there's remains of shellfish and mollusk and coral and bone." Now that's true of a particular kind of limestone that's known as coquina. If you've ever heard of what's that castle in Florida
Coral
that the
Castle?
guy supposedly built by him? Coral Castle. That's made of coquina. You can get up there with a naked eye and you can see all the little bits of shell and skeleton that are throughout it. And he said if you just looked, you would have seen, because obviously I'm not suggesting that a titanic being's bones are going to be comprised of little bits of crushed pieces of coral and shellfish and whatnot. It would consume those in the way that a whale eats krill or something, but it would assimilate that nutrition to create its bones. Its bones wouldn't be made of that. So I was well aware that that would be a complete deal breaker for the theory. And so I decided to test it by, I got my hands on one of these Wi-Fi microscopes that works with the phone. They're so cheap now. 50 bucks, you can get a Wi-Fi microscope that's 1000x. Anyone who's got, if you've got kids and they have cell phones, which they shouldn't, but if they do, get them one of those. It'll blow their mind. You know, the way they'll see the world. So I went up there knowing that if I found a hint of any of that stuff in any of this limestone, that was game over for the Titan theory, right? None. None. I had been hiking for years. I'd never seen a fossil in any of this stone. Not one. And I went up with a 1000x microscope, no hint of any of that. But what it does match, 1-to-1, is bone of a titanic being. And all the components are there. So what are the odds? So I said that over a 2-year period, that list grew to over 50. So either we're in the Twilight Zone or a simulation that's adapting itself to my investigations, or our past, our history, our legends, our mythologies are telling us the truth about our past, and that those trees and those titanic beings, I mean, we've got the myth of Paul Bunyan in North America. Yeah. Who was he? He was a titanic being that went around cutting down giant trees. Like, what? Yeah. You know, there's myths, you know, Jack and the Beanstalk. There's lots of examples, but we all think they're just, you know, fun stories.
Yeah. Let's talk about the possibility of human titans, of giant humans. We know that there were giant bones discovered through the mounds and different ancient burial sites. They admittedly found up to 7 feet or slightly larger size human bones, but there's evidence for much larger humanoids in our ancient past. But as far as the size and scale that we're discussing today, this is beyond what most people...
It's hard to wrap your head around.
Beyond what most people can imagine. How big are we really talking when we're looking at humanoids?
So the distinction between giants and titans is huge, right? We're talking about a fractal level up. Like, we average 6 feet or you know, I don't know, you know, what the average is, but, you know, then they find skeletal remains of giants that the Smithsonian disappears that are, you know, 10 feet, 12, 15. And then, like the Bible and these other ancient texts, I'm not sure, you know, what the Bible says, but I know that there are texts that are describing beings that are 50 to 100 feet tall, right? Humanoids. But there's a book called the Book of Enoch and also the Book of Jasher that were both removed from the Bible. They predate the Bible, and they're part of what are known as the apocryphal texts. And in the Book of Enoch, it talks about titans. It talks about God was going to send a flood to purge the earth. That would be the flood of Noah, right? And why was he purging the earth? Because there was all these corrupted beings, because they were messing with, you know, genetics and doing all this stuff, and they were cannibalistic, and they were destroying the realm, and so God was going to clean up, right? Well, the reason, so the story, I guess, is that they sent the angels went to work at the great trees, right? The trees are also described in these ancient texts. And they brought the trees down in preparation for the flood so that the corrupted beings wouldn't be able to flee the flood by climbing the trees. So that's, you know, that's one narrative. I mean, the Norse mythologies, we've got Yggdrasil, the great world tree. There's lots, you know, I'm not saying the Bible is you know, that's the explanation for things. But these texts that were removed from the Bible are describing this, and they also give a scale to the Titans. And they say that they were 3,000 ells tall. And an ell is a unit of measurement. I don't know what it is in and of itself, but 3,000 of them is 1 mile. So this book is talking about creatures that were 1 mile tall, 5,000 feet plus. Montgo is what is it? 763 meters high. It's almost a kilometer. right? But it looks like it's laying on its stomach with the head tilted back. So it's not on its feet, obviously. It would be pretty obvious that it was an elephant,
Yeah.
right? But we're talking about something that was 3 miles long and almost a mile tall. And that, interestingly enough, and I didn't know this, I didn't know about the Book of Enoch or any of this stuff until I had already started making videos on the subject. And that's when people are like, hey, by the way, and they're sending me this and they're sending me that. And all of a sudden I had even more data points. Like I've had people send me all kinds of information on petrification. One guy um, had a funeral pyre for his dog that burned for 36 hours with the hottest wood imaginable. And the only thing that survived the fire was the heart of the dog.
Interesting.
So I theorized early on, like, why am I finding these stones? If these were hearts, why am I finding them outside the body? Where's the rest of the body? Where are the bones? And blah, blah, blah. So I hypothesized that I call it boiled egg theory, that whether it's a plasma event or volcanic, where pyroclastic flows can reach temperatures of up to 1500 degrees Celsius and move at the speed of sound, that's pretty powerful, easily powerful enough to destroy a body in short order. Well, what would happen to the organs which are floating in liquid inside of a big fatty chamber? And each one of the organs is inside of its own fatty chamber. And I started thinking about eggs and how if you have a fresh egg and you break it open, it's liquid and it pours out. But if you put it in boiling water for 10 minutes, it hardens. Well, what would happen to our organs if they were boiled alive, right? And also if you put something in a pressure cooker, it happens much quicker with less power or less heat needed, right? Because of the pressure. So here we've got pressure cooker. We have eggs in the form of organs, but the egg, if you cook it too quick, the shell cracks and then the protein leaks out. But the pericardium is designed to, be flexible with the contraction of the heart. And the heart is very dense, so it's the organ most likely to survive something like that because the pericardium is the thickest of the fatty sacs. So that's why I call it boiled egg theory, is that outer portion of the body is being annihilated while things are, and maybe they don't turn all the way to stone. Maybe that process is finished off in mud. I don't know, but that was a theory I presented to the geologist, and she was like, after seeing the visual evidence of, it wasn't just me talking, it was me showing. She was like, this is actually pretty interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of scientific professionals that you presented your work to. What has been the reaction from some of the scientific community to your work overall?
I've had several geologists and a lot of anatomists in the form of doctors and nurses and different who have come in and posted amazing comments on my channel over the years because they can see what I see and they have the training to recognize the features. So they know I'm not just talking out my rear. I'm actually, I've got the physical evidence to show it, and I'm not just trying to fool people with words. I'm actually showing the anatomy, and then here's the feature, and you can decide for yourself if it's, I had some years back, I had a couple of guys who reached out. One of them was an amateur geologist, and his friend was the owner and ran a very reputable laboratory in Arizona. And they had come across my videos after a friend recommended him, and they were fascinated by the Heartstone phenomenon and wanted to do some testing, and they were wondering if I would send them some stones. So I sent them 12 stones, and I made a video before I sent them off called Exciting Research Day. It's on my channel. It's just like a 15-minute video showing each of the stones I sent them and rotating them and showing them and explaining why I chose those particular stones to be representative of the phenomenon. I thought that I was going to get lab results back, that they were going to do actual testing. They did no testing. I got an opinion piece. They did a survey where they took one of the least descriptive stones that I had sent them and claimed to have asked 100 different people what they thought it looked like as a scientific experiment, which is absolutely ridiculous if you know anything about how science is conducted. And so I got a survey of what 100 people thought my stone looked like. That was those were the lab results I
Wow.
got. It was absolutely embarrassing to these guys.
Yeah.
And they were presenting. So they recorded the first conversation with me, and then they recorded the conversation that they had as they discussed the results after he had quote unquote analyzed the stones. So I had 90 minutes of audio of these conversations where they go and they use a lot of difficult terminology for people who haven't studied the
Mm.
stuff. And so I took those 90 minutes, I broke all that down. I showed people, don't let the terminology dissuade you. These are easy concepts that they're presenting. This is what this word means. This is what the thing that he's describing looks like. And this is what my stone looks like. Do they look the same to you? No, you know. And so I had to do this for all 90 minutes of that audio. So that video is on my channel. It's called Paradigm Crushed. It's 3 hours, but I mean, if you read the reviews in the comment sections, you'll see what people have thought of the work that I did. That one video took 6 weeks to make because there was so much information to cover. But it's all very visual and it's all easily
Yeah.
graspable. Just don't let the terminology, get to
Well,
you.
I love your work, man. What is next for you? Anything in the works?
Well, the biggest thing for me right now that I would like is to, continue with some more in-depth analysis of the stones. And now it looks like I might have a good contact for that of somebody who's actually open-minded rather than the charlatans that I encountered in the U.S. Um, and then I've also been invited to speak at a lot of events in the last couple of years. I was in Australia and Serbia a couple of times, and London some months back. I'll be leaving next month to
Oh,
Anarchapulco, which is
wonderful.
in its
My friend
12th year. It's
Charlie
going to be
MC's
in
that.
Puerto Vallarta. Oh,
Yeah, Charlie
Robinson.
Robinson. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I've met him a couple times now. Yeah, great guy. And yeah, so there's some it's an amazing list of speakers that'll be
That's awesome.
there. Mark Devlin, Andrew
Yeah.
Kaufman, and a whole bunch of other great guys. Um, and a couple other events after that. I need to do more promotion on my book. I did a kind of a soft release, and I haven't really done the footwork necessary to get it out there to the world, but it's getting incredible reviews and people are really enjoying the story and telling me that it reads like a movie. So
One more time, plug that book for everyone.
that's it's called The Hacker Prince, a true story, and it chronicles my misadventures as a hacker in the 80s when I got caught and went to jail for infiltrating Microsoft and Boeing and a couple of other companies. And went to jail for it, and I was the first hacker in the world to go to jail for the crime of hacking. So it's kind of a bizarre chapter of my past, and it was this October 17th. It was the 40-year anniversary of when I got
Oh, right on.
busted. So that's how long it took me to get the book out.
Well, Mike, this was great.
Yeah,
Definitely have to do this again. There's much more we can cover. And until next time,
yeah.
everyone, have an excellent evening. Watch Doors of Perception now on Amazon Prime. You can now stream the forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana free on Tubi TV. If you're looking to start your therapeutic microdosing journey, but don't know where to start, especially when looking for the highest quality ingredients, including nootropics, and what you'd expect from a true microdose capsule, check out our friends at Brainsupreme. They offer the absolute highest quality ingredients so you can start your microdosing journey knowing that you're getting top-notch ingredients. To find out more, visit their website using that link right in the description, and you can get 15% off your entire order. Hello, friends. I am so excited to tell you about Independent Media Token. Independent Media Token is a brand new way to show your support for independent media without having to donate a dime. Independent Media Token is a cryptocurrency on the Solana blockchain designed to generate funds to promote and foster the growth of independent content creators, allowing them to engage in their art without having to worry about being demonetized. Through a network of media partners of which you yourself can become a part of, Independent Media Token's goal is to ensure the powers that be can never cut off all of our areas of funding and censor the only free voices left in the world. Join the movement today. You can pick up Independent Media Token using Phantom Wallet or the Solana wallet of your choice, where you can easily swap your Solana for IMT. Grab some IMT today and remember to always know your team. To learn more, visit independentmediatoken.com or use the link right in the description. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Maybe the fake alien invasion? Now is the time to prepare yourself and your family for any event. Check out Prep Starts Now. Their mission is to provide high-quality preparedness products that empower individuals and families to be ready for any situation. They're committed to delivering reliable, trusted gear to ensure your safety, security, and peace of mind in times of need. Their product selection is carefully curated to provide you with the essential gear you need to stay prepared. From emergency kits to tactical tools, every item is chosen for its reliability and practicality. Prep Starts Now understands the importance of family, and their goal is to equip you with everything you need to build a solid plan for your family's preparedness. In today's ever-changing world, being prepared is more important than ever, and Prep Starts Now is here to help you and your family stay ready with quality products and practical guidance. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your order. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history.